Well, as my mentor and good friend, Dr. Peter Bechtold said, he said, some short fat man, and if you're young, that could be Dan DeVito, and if you're older, it could be Mickey Rooney, said after dinner speeches should be short and funny. And so I'll be short and funny, and I'm almost there physiologically. Sardar asked me to give a kind of a personal reflection on what intercultural dialogue has meant to me. So I'm going to do this on 3 levels very quickly. One is personal. I am a second-generation American. Both my parents are from Central Europe. My father looked Germanic and fairly blonde. My mother was very dark. Both parents were from mixed Jewish Catholic heritage, both dogged agnostics. And in my mother's side, the kind of equivalent of a Anglo-American's distant American Indian, Native American ancestor, mine was a Turk. So I am possibly partially Turkish too. Now this was all fine, this sounds fine in the abstract, but I grew up in small New England towns back in the 50s, and a hybrid like me didn't exactly fit the program. And I was kind of a skinny, scrawny type, and so even on the playgrounds, even as early as kindergarten, I remember having to negotiate a lot of intercultural space, let alone when I looked in the mirror and combed my hair. And what's more, my grandparents lived with us too, so I actually grew up in an extended family. To say that in this world there's more and more mixing, more and more of us are going outside the boundaries of our own communities for marriage, for friendship, and so forth. My wife here is from Thailand. My son is adopted from Morocco, so we are kind of a three to four continent family, depending on how you count them. And that's the point. I mean, I think that we are having these adventures and we're living out that dream that, in a way, the Rumi Forum stands for. Now, professionally, I'm a public diplomacy officer. What that means is the systematic attempt of people in one government to understand, which means have the language, get into the culture, understand the social narratives of people in the countries you serve, to then try to communicate, engage in communication. Now, our military communicator friends would say, in order to influence, change behavior, get support for US policy. More often, the victory is maybe just getting a kind of a crack of a door open in someone's mind and creating a little cognitive dissonance, especially when it comes to some of the hateful and violent philosophies that have characterized human history. If you can counter those narratives just to the extent where someone that's vulnerable to, let's say, extremist group recruitment has that second thought, well, maybe, you know, if the ideology is what's driving me, I'll give it a second thought. A couple of anecdotes. One from Yemen, and we have former Ambassador David Newton here, and we've been telling Yemen stories all evening. I was a junior officer there, and one of the things that bothered me was that most of my colleagues socialized with the 30 or 40 or 50 Yemenis that were most westernized, that had either studied in the West or in the Soviet Union, and maybe in Baghdad. And I somehow said, well, I didn't come out here to kind of talk to people that were most like me. And I immediately, with permission of my boss, I went out and I saw the 2 Muslim Brotherhood groups in town. One, it's a Sunni Shia society, so there were 2. And they were shocked. They'd never seen a diplomat. A diplomat had never walked in, they said. And we had in those days something called the Arabic wireless file, and it was like the Wizard of Oz when the curtains pulled back with these 2 radios. And to get the file, there could be no sunspot storms, no atmospheric interference, and you had to hit both frequencies just right, and then you got text in Arabic. So I trotted out some of these texts that our writers here in Washington cranked out. Muslim life in America, sort of Arabic studies in American universities, so forth. And these gentlemen, all of who had newsletters, published them. Now, one of my problems was I could not get anywhere with the TV and radio people because they were Baathists and they were pretty anti-American. And what happened was when they started seeing these newsletters from the more religiously conservative among their staffers. They said, well, this is great stuff. Why can't we get the radio and TV equivalents? So I got a call from the Ministry of Information, and it was an open door, and I began to place Voice of America materials. Just, you know, I thought, another thing, when I was in Jordan as the public affairs officer, we had an election coming up that was that the palace and the government was very nervous about. And it was right after the first Gulf War when all these Jordanians and Palestinians had been expelled from their very lucrative jobs in the Gulf, and they were back in Jordan. Some of them barely were more, you know, the Jordanianness consisted in having a passport. Building these mansions in the hills and not quite knowing what was going to happen next. Well, a friend of mine who was the director of TV kind of got into their heads. He said, you know, they have this passport, they have money, they have nowhere to go, we have an election, and there are about 500,000 of these people. And so he and I were talking one night, and he said, their narrative is they want to fit in. I said, how can we get them to vote? Because he knew they were moderate votes. This was his agenda. And I've been talking to him about getting in an expert on public service announcements, a peculiar American art form. And so I brought the person in, and you know, they claim that this guy and the staff he worked with and the announcements they cranked out changed the course of the election. I don't know, but you know, again, this may sound a little manipulative, but the fact is, in our communicative arts, we have to have an intercultural dialogue. We have to understand other people's narratives and motives in order to communicate them. It's not just having a policy, having a message and messaging down. It's engaging. It's seeing, hey, what's gonna ring this person's bell? What rings my bell that may be the same as what rings his bell? And that's, you know, anyone that's in marketing and advertising, and if someone tells me that there's no one in this room that does that for a living, I'm going to say, you're kidding me. So professionally, that's a big part of it. I've always spoken at least some language where I've served, and it's really been a great entree, and I've had these incredible friendships. Finally, the last level on intercultural dialogue is in a way the ultimate one, the most abstract, the most dangerous, and that is religion. Religion, which in history I think more times has been used to erect walls of identity between people, but which I have always believed, partially because of my background. Oh, by the way, having agnostic parents is a great way to get a religious son, because I'm pretty religious, and it was probably because it was never forced down my throat. I said, well, you know, religion, you know, the inner, that light, that sense of whether you call it God or you call it just kind of undifferentiated, egoless awareness, whatever you call it, it's a human experience, and it's a uniting experience. And, you know, we all go through lives that have fairly similar patterns, and most of the great traditions have certain ritual observances of those patterns. And just sitting down and through the Interfaith Council of Washington's Interfaith Dialogues, which I had the privilege of doing last summer, very interesting. I mean, no one was trying to convert anyone, but people just, you know, okay, what happens, you know, if you lose someone in your community, or what happens at this moment or transition in life? Incredible bond, and we still email each other, and we're a tight group. And it's another great thing about Montgomery County, where I will end by saying I'm proud to live, and it sure isn't small town New England. Thank you.